For those of you who do not know me, my name's up there somewhere, Fred Payton, and I'm a board member, not a board member, I'm a volunteer researcher here at the Historical Society. I spend mornings, Monday through Friday, down in the basement, doing what I can do to try and find out little bits about Prince Albert history. So, and before I get going too far though, I want to just say that we are on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. So, and we like to honor the people who have gone before us. Personally, I don't think we can honor people better than by researching the history and telling the story about what's happened in the past. I want to say thanks as well today to Connie Gerwing and the committee that puts together these coffee and conversations. Thank you for inviting me. And of course I need to say thank you to both our curator Michelle and to our educator Jerry, because they're very helpful. And a special thanks to those who volunteer in the archives along with me. Sandy's standing over there at the door with the Saskatchewan Rough Rider jersey on. Yay! And Ken Guido, who can't be here this afternoon because Ken's visiting his 90-year-old brother who is not very well. So, but those people really support me and really help me, and I really, really do appreciate them. The information you're going to hear this afternoon is information that I have collected, and I've established a fairly large file of information on historic hotels in Prince Albert. And I collect that information from a variety of sources, obviously from a number of different directories, like the 1888 McPhillips Directory, the 1880 to 1908 Manitoba and Northwest Territories directories, the Henderson's directories, and also the A.G. Dunn and Company directory in the Saskatchewan business directory, and also telephone directories. And often you need to go back and forth between directories, because a directory might come out in May and it may list some business or some person, and they disappear before next year. But you don't know when they disappeared. Maybe it was in April of the following year, or maybe it was in June of that year. So you go back to the telephone directories, which came out in those days in October, and you can connect and see, oh, are they still in Prince Albert or not? So that's one of the things that I do when I'm trying to put information together. And I have to tell you that the earlier directories do not necessarily contain full information. For example, they may have the name Thomas Oram, hotelier. That doesn't tell you an awful lot, except that somehow or another he worked in a hotel. And that would be maybe 1886. So you don't really know which hotel or which where he worked, how long he worked there, and so on. So the information that is available to me is the information that I'm using to do this story this afternoon. If you think that I have inaccurate information, I'd love to hear it, because one way or another I need to know if the information's inaccurate. And if it's inaccurate, then I'll change it. But I might go back and find out that, I have the right information in the first place, and you have the inaccurate information. But at least I need to do the research to find that out. So please let me know if you think I have inaccurate information. Also, if you have more information, if you've been around for quite a few years in this community, and you go back far enough that you know who may or who may not have been involved in something, please let me know, because we need to get as much information as we possibly can. So we're going to go to the first slide, Connie, thank you very much. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the requirements of settlement. Gary Abrams, in his History of Prince Albert, the first 100 years, which was published in 1966. Imagine that, founded in 1866, first 100 years, 1966. Anyway, he refers to Prince Albert as the fastest growing settlement in the Northwest in the years 1874 to 1881. So there are people coming into this community of Prince Albert, and they don't have a place to stay. Where are they going to stay? Well, I found the earliest note that I found about, not really a hotel, but a place to stay, was in the November 15th, 1907 Wheat Belt Review. And it indicated that Charles Mayor's house was used as the settlement's hotel. This was Charles Mayor's house. The house was actually built in 1875 by a man by the name of J.E. MacDonald, and James Stevenson had it enlarged by the Goodfellow brothers, and the house was then sold to Mayor, who named it Homeswood. Mayor first moved to Prince Albert in 1877. He left and went back east when things started to heat up out around Duck Lake and Batoche and so on. And then he returned to Prince Albert in the summer of 1886. The Wheat Belt Review article suggested that the Queen's Hotel was considered to have been the first actual hotel. Oh, sorry, let me go back. I want to talk about, oh yeah, the Queen's Hotel was listed as being the first actual hotel. But in fact, in 1880, at 1st Street and 9th Avenue East, there was the Deacon Hotel. And Deacon's Hotel, you can tell it's a 2-story brick. It's got a widow's walk on the top. And Mrs. Deacon actually ran the hotel back in 1880. Now, Richard Deacon, and some of you might, if you know your Prince Albert history, recognize the name Captain Richard Deacon. He was a riverboat man, but he married in the Red River settlement a woman by the name of Mary Macbeth in 1871. And they arrived in Prince Albert in September of 1876. So shortly after that, in the Prince Albert's East End, Goshen, or the Hudson's Bay Company Reserve, at around 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue, and 1st Street East, they built this brick hotel. And it was the earliest lodging for the first Northwest Mounted Police that came to Prince Albert. So it wasn't the Queen's Hotel, but the Deacon's Hotel that was the first actual hotel. Here we have the Queen's Hotel. It was a 3-story frame structure located on Central Avenue at 9th Street. McPhillips directory indicates that it was built in 1886, but an ad in the Prince Albert Times indicates that the hotel was actually established in 1885. And that's probably one of those things where they did the survey early in the year, the hotel was opened later in the year, and so they first noted its being in business in 1886, when in fact it was 1885. Thomas Oram was the proprietor of the Queen's Hotel, at least from 1888. And he had a clerk by the name of Andrew Westwood in 1888. By the autumn of 1891, the Queen's had an electric light over the door. 1891.
Wow.
They had electricity. In 1898, George Stocker first engaged in the hotel business with William Gladstone, and they operated the Queen's Hotel. The partnership was dissolved early in the 1900s. We're not sure, 1901 or 1903, and Stocker entered into partnership with his brother-in-law, previous owner of the hotel, Thomas Oram. The reason I think it might have been 1901 is because Oram was listed in the Manitoba and Northwest Territories Directory of 1901 as an hotel keeper. And we can go to the next. And this, that was the Queen's Hotel, and it became the Central Hotel. Next one, please, Connie. And, okay, this one is the Canistino Hotel, which Stocker also built. And the next one is the Shellbrook Hotel.
You were in reverse.
This is the Shellbrook.
And then the
I'm
next one
reversed, I'm sorry.
This is
I
Canistino.
apologize. I didn't put the slides together. And I do have a list, but apparently it's a little confusing. Anyways, so Stocker built the Canistino Hotel with his partner H.W. Hudson, and then in 1912 built the Shellbrook Hotel. He eventually moved to Shellbrook and managed the hotel until his death in October of 1931. Stocker was also a co-owner of the Prince Albert Hotel with a man by the name of Samuel McLeod. Don't know if you've heard of him or not, but you probably have. An ad in the Prince Albert Times indicates that the commodious and old-established hotel, we're talking about the Queen's now, was leased to George Stocker. It said that the bus meets all trains, has good sample rooms, the room rates are $1 to $2 a day. It is renovated throughout, replete with electric light, hot air furnace, and all modern conveniences. They also endeavor, and this is something I ran across time and time and time again with respect to the hotels back in those days, they endeavor to stock the best wines, best ales, best lager, best porter, and best cigars. They also sold soft drinks. Drinks could be supplied at 10 cents a piece or 3 for 25 cents. And, I don't know why they put this in about a hotel, but the bedroom and dining department will be all that can be desired. A live wire in the basement of the hotel set fire to a joint about 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the 1st of February 1906. Robert Hoey noticed the smoke and with the assistance of A. Anderson and others extinguished the fire. The cellar was full of smoke and the hall floor had to be taken up. And that was the 4th time that the hotel had escaped considerable loss. In July of 1906, there was an addition worth $3,500. And in November of 1906, it was noted that George Stocker added a handsome new mahogany bar, the fixtures of which would do credit to any Winnipeg hotel. The 1910 ad in the Prince Albert Times Hudson Bay Special Edition noted that they had commodious sample rooms for travelers, pool and billiard room, finest brands of wines, liquors, cigars, cuisine and dining room on excelled sleeping apartments, well lighted and ventilated. And the bus meets all trains. And we're talking about a horse-drawn carriage here, not really a bus. 1913, there was a man by the name of Elm, U.E. Elm, who was the proprietor. And in 1914, Herb Wilkin was the proprietor. In June of 1916, they noted that under new management, $1.50 a day per room. And in December of 1916, we beg to announce that we have rented the popular Queen's Hotel and are prepared to give accommodation to a large number of guests. We desire to give satisfaction. If any complaints, see the manager. And the managers at that time were Bowman and LaFortune. Perhaps a little bit shady, I'm not sure. Wes, you might be able to enlighten us on that, because in May 1917, La Fortune, proprietor of the Queen's Hotel, and two others were drinking in the room, and La Fortune was fined $50. June 1917, Ross and E.M. Cottam, joint proprietors of the hotel, were given 3 months hard labor for, Ryan, keeping a disorderly house. So, Brian was talking about that with me beforehand. The hotel and cafe were managed by H.M. Hong Kee from 1921 till 1921, and then by Ma Kim Chung from 1932 on. And in 1960, it was in the paper that one of the city's oldest hotels will soon be torn down. Kim Chung, 65, proprietor of the Central Hotel and Cafe, sold the property to the Prince Albert Cooperative Limited after 40 years in business. He bought into the hotel in 1919 with 5 partners, all of whom are now deceased. He had come to Canada in 1912, first to Saskatoon, then to Regina, and finally to Prince Albert. He enlarged the dining facility in 1926, closing the Olympia Cafe, later called the Princess. So when the Queen's had the Princess Cafe in it, and that's interesting, eh? When the Princess was closed in the Queen's Hotel, it migrated up Central Avenue to where the Bison is now, and now it's in where the P.O. Cafe used to be. Although city records show that the hotel was owned by Thomas Oram in 1887, they do not record when it was built. However, my research indicates it was built in 1886. Excuse me, it's currently Plaza 88, formerly the Co-op store, and it was a Co-op store in 1960. So, the second hotel, the Queen's, became the Central, and then it was torn down in the early 1960s. The next hotel is the Prince Albert Hotel. Now, the Prince Albert Hotel, as you can see there, was a frame structure, and it was built by David Pollock in 1886-1887. Fire destroyed the original frame hotel in February 1904. It was rebuilt of brick with cornerstone laid by Mayor Gilmore on June 2nd the same year. It was also the likely occasion of the installation of the new boiler, which came off the Marquess Riverboat. David Pollock was the proprietor back in 1888. He was listed as a hotel keeper in 1901, and in 1905, cornice work on the hotel. Can we move to the next one, please, Connie? Yeah, the cornice work.
That's the National.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And the Prince Albert Hotel became the National Hotel.
Okay.
And the cornice work, you can see up there, was undertaken by O.B. Manville and was to be completed at the earliest date. That was in June of 1905. The cornice of the hotel was completed. It received a coat of paint in July, and then 2 large signs were erected, the signs placed in position on the hotel later in July. And you can just see the sign on the very top of the cornice up there, and that was for the Prince Albert Hotel. David Pollock had the main entrance altered and improved in July of 1906. And you can see that vehicle just parked in front of it there. The City Council had, at their meeting in April, passed a motion asking Pollock to remove the platform at the hotel's front door. He had already planned to alter the step and had instructed that the required material be purchased. The step was actually on his own property, not on the street, but because he'd already planned to change it, he let the matter drop. And in 1906, he had the interior of the hotel painted and the walls replastered. And later in December of 1906, the hotel was now under new management of McEwen and Macbeth. And McEwen and Macbeth contemplate many alterations. A new bar room will be built on the north end, and the present bar room will be converted into an office. The present office will be included in the dining room. The house will be papered and painted. Several alterations are contemplated in the dining room. McEwen currently in charge, but has secured the services of an experienced hotel manager. And in December of 1906, it was reported that the many friends of John Pollock, who was David Pollock's son, will be happy to know that the new proprietors of the hotel have prevailed upon him to remain as the manager of the bar and billiard room. And in 1907, 1908, a guy by the name of J.D. McLeod bought the hotel. J.D. McLeod had actually owned the Royal Hotel, which we'll talk about in a bit, moved to Moose Jaw, and then moved to Regina, where he managed a couple of hotels. Interestingly enough, they were hotels which were named well, it doesn't matter what they were named. But J.D. McLeod was a brother of Samuel McLeod. So, and then Samuel McLeod and George Stalker bought out J.D. McLeod, and with McLeod's son, managed it. McLeod's son, W.R. McLeod, later becoming the part owner of the hotel. Okay, and you all know Keyhole Castle, and you know the house that's second from the corner on First Avenue East, just above 20th Street. That was the house that Samuel built for W.R. McLeod.
That's our house.
Oh, that house has a magnificent history, and I'm sure the people living there now are even more important than W.R. McLeod. Okay, so the Hudson Bay edition of the Prince Albert Times, which I mentioned earlier, had an ad for the Prince Albert Hotel. $2 a day, comfortable, commodious, equipped with all modern conveniences. The bus meets all trains, first-class table, first-class rooms, finest of wines, liquors, cigars. And George Dangerfield was at that time the proprietor. He sold out to Thomas Hetherington and Joseph Peoples in 1913. And it's really interesting to see how, as the economy of Prince Albert started to grow from 1900 up to 1913, there was more and more interest in hotels being opened and in people buying the existing hotels, because Prince Albert was going to be such a marvelous and thriving community. Little did they know. Anyways, the hotel under new management, under Hetherington and Peoples, the cafe opened daily from 7 to 11, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Accommodation for roomers or traveling public. Patronized this clean, up-to-date hotel. And then in 1919, because of course things had fallen apart with the city economy between 1914 and 1918, in 1919 there was a new proprietor of the Prince Albert Hotel, a man by the name of Ernie Bigger. And he had a co-owner for a couple of years, from 21 to 22, a man by the name of S.P. Kalos. Bigger actually owned the hotel through to 1927. In 1921, the ad in the Daily Herald listed the hotel as the Empire Hotel. So, from Prince Albert to Empire it went. Prince Albert's new hostelry, the last word in comfort and cleanliness, hot and cold water in 50 bright rooms, free bus meets all trains, proprietor now is a man by the name of Tom Mikas. Tom Mikas was formerly of Saskatoon. He bought the Prince Albert Hotel, took over the hotel over the weekend, beginning of September 1928, and he intended to spend a large sum decorating and remodeling, including hot and cold running water in each room. Mikas was a returned soldier who had served in France with the Canadian Scottish Battalion. He was an experienced hotel man, had resided in Saskatoon since his return from the Great War. And he had a manager by the name of W.G. Tickle. I always thought it was Tickell, but it is actually Tickle, who took over in 1929. 1931, the hotel changed hands at the end of November. W.H. Smith is the new proprietor. And the sale price was not announced. And in 1932 to 1936, it became known as the National Hotel, and Ernest O'Brien was the proprietor. And I suspect, although I haven't found anything to corroborate it, that with the Empress Hotel just up First Avenue West, people would get confused between the Empire Hotel on First Avenue West and the Empress Hotel, and they were losing business to the Empress. People would go and check in at the Empress thinking they were checking in at the Empire. Anyway, the hotel was managed by Thomas Isherwood between 38 to 41, and then in April of 1942, Benjamin Pinar took over management. Again, extensive renovations completed by late October, rooms with adjoining bath with modern new plumbing. The bridal suite contains twin 3/4 beds with Slumber King mattresses. And I'm wondering about a bridal suite with twin beds, but that's okay. Slumber King mattresses, dressing table and comfortable lounge chairs with footstools. And what had previously been a dugout basement had a new concrete floor throughout. Boiler room was bricked in and concrete floor poured underneath. The laundry room was moved from the first floor to the basement with new piping throughout and new wiring. And I can tell you that there's one woman in Prince Albert with whom I have communication fairly frequently, who has told me that her parents stayed at the National Hotel in that bridal suite when they got married. They were on their way from Saskatoon to Waskesiu. So I guess the bridal suite was appropriate for them because she wasn't born too long after they got married. From 1945 to 1951, Harry Mackay was the manager of the National Hotel, and it became a Mackay Hotel Company Limited ownership in 1950, hotel managed by G.W. Mackay and Harry Mackay. From 52 to 54, Daniel Lutzak was the manager, and by 55, Daniel Lutzak, his brother Richard, Walter Dohaniak were the proprietors of the National Hotel. Then in 1956 to 1959, B.T. Laskin and Frank J. Masick. You remember him, Wes? Was the proprietor. And by 1960, Frank Masick had bought out Laskin. F.J. Masick was the proprietor until 1969. After that, Roger Egger, Gary Anderson, Ray Pilon, up until 1980 were the managers. In 1981 and 82, Russ Williams and Ellen Furster managed the hotel. And after that, Russ and Georgie Williams were the owners and managers of the hotel. And you'll know Georgie's Beer and Wine Store, which was named after Georgie Williams. Before it was demolished, it was sold to an out-of-province ownership, but it was demolished in 2023. Okay, so that's the Prince Albert Empire National Hotel. We can move on to the next You would. And this is the Royal Hotel. The Royal Hotel, anybody remember where it stood? It stood on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 12th Street West on the south side, across from what is now the Mann Art Gallery. Okay. At one time, it was the Prince Albert Men's Club, a very early edition of the Prince Albert Men's Club. And when Lucy Maud Montgomery came to Prince Albert in August of 1890, it was a high school. And she attended the high school in that building. Lucy, in her diary, notes, there are a lot of rooms in the building. It was formerly a hotel, and they are all used for different purposes. The room above ours is a public ballroom, and on the occasion of a ball, our room is used as a ladies' dressing room. On the next morning, we generally find numerous hairpins, feathers, flowers, etc., strewn over the floor, and sometimes a hand mirror or two. On the other side of a long, dusty, cobwebby hall is the town council room, and above it the Freemasons' room. In the back of the building are the patrol quarters, where 2 or 3 mounted policemen are stationed to patrol the town. When they arrest a drunken man, they bring him in there, hailing him through the hall and locking him up in one of the row of small dark cells, which runs directly back to our room. She also said, at recess, we girls wander around the dusty old place or sit out on the veranda. Donald MacLeod, and I mentioned him earlier, Donald MacLeod, brother of Samuel, bought the Royal Hotel in 1891, and he operated it until he moved to Moose Jaw in 1894. And then in 1905, the Royal Hotel opened Tuesday noon to the public, with a big opening on Friday, which would have been May the 10th. And that hotel was then owned and operated by Bricker and Dangerfield. Bricker and Dangerfield, of course, wanted to make improvements. At least they wanted to advertise that. The basement was being dug, an addition constructed to house a large kitchen and give the hotel 12 more bedrooms. That was in May of 1905. In March of 1905, at City Council, there was a request in regard to the license to be granted for the hotel. And Alderman Deacon took a stand against granting a liquor license and demanded a recorded vote. Deacon was the only member of council to vote against the application.
Rule of corruption.
The Board of License Commissioners for District 10 was to meet in Prince Albert on May 16th. So that's 2 months after this, at 10 a.m. to consider applications for licenses. This meeting included not only the Royal, but also the Queen's, which was owned at that time by Stockard, the Windsor, which was owned by Westwood and Clemens, Prince Albert, which was owned by Pollock. We don't have any report of what decisions were made, but since they all continued operating, I'm presuming they received their licenses. The ad in the Saskatchewan Times indicated that the hotel has been thoroughly renovated and has a large new addition, an open bar stocked with, do you want to guess? Finest wines, liquors, ales, and porters, cigars of the choicest brands. Your patronage is invited. And then later on an ad that said the hotel has been thoroughly renovated and a large addition added thereto and is now open to the public. And again, their bar is stocked with the finest wines. This was in February of 1906. So, and at that point, February 15th, 1906, A.E. Bricker, formerly of the hotel, is fur trading in the North Country. So he had split off from Dangerfield and gone trapping. Dangerfield continued to be the proprietor until he sold the hotel to W.J. Harmer, who paid $15,000 for the property. And Dangerfield moved to Winnipeg. Possession date for the new owner was July 1st, 1906. So it ran from then until the early 1940s. And it was under the ownership of a couple of women. The first 2 years of ownership under the first woman was interrupted by ownership by another woman. And then the next 2 years, the ownership reverted to the first woman. And reading between the lines, it sounds like the Royal Hotel was also a disreputable hotel. And that the year away for the first woman who came back and took over again was a year that she might have been spending at His Majesty's pleasure. The hotel eventually was demolished when they built the memorial pool and the entrance to the memorial pool. So, we can go now to the Saskatchewan Hotel. That's still the Royal.
It says Hotel Saskatchewan at the bottom.
Oh, it does too,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's a different shot that I was thinking of. Yeah, okay, thank you. So O'Connor, Charles O'Connor, and a man by the name of Vigent, built an $18,000 structure. It was a splendid site. It was commodious and comfortable.
Commodious always sounds ominous and like a toilet.
What's that?
Commodious sounds like a toilet in that.
Yeah, I don't know if they had commodes in there. I didn't get them in the hall or outside. Anyways, it was built on Saskatchewan Avenue. Does anyone know where Saskatchewan Avenue was?
Must have been 15th Street.
Very good, Connie. Sharp eyes.
I can read.
Saskatchewan Avenue, opposite the CNR station. And this is 1906, so that would be the Canadian Northern Railroad station. Work on the hotel, it started the week of September 13th. It will contain 25 rooms. William Knox had the contract, and it should be ready for occupancy in a couple of months. Apparently William Knox was a quicker contractor than the guy who's rebuilding the A&W down on First Avenue. In 1908, it was Charles O'Connor and Company who were the proprietor. Vigent had moved on. And then in 1909, Alphonse Lapointe and Joseph Rioux were the proprietors. Alphonse, I think, got wise, because by 1911, he'd left Joseph Rioux in sole ownership of the Saskatchewan Hotel. And Rioux owned it until 1931. And one of the reasons I say that Lapointe probably got wise is because the management of the hotel was involved in selling illegal alcohol during Prohibition. June 6, 1917, Rioux sent to jail on a liquor charge, 6 weeks hard labor plus $100 in costs. So, July 23rd, he gets out of jail. I saw the other day it was called Kerr Castle, because F.W. Kerr was the warden of the jail at the time, known as Kerr Castle. Joseph Rioux gets out of jail on the 23rd of July 1917, and he is rearrested as he leaves jail, accused of storing liquor in Waukau and having it shipped to Prince Albert on May 31st. He was released on $1,000 bail.
How do you spell that last name?
R-I-O-U-X.
Okay.
And then later on we discover a former hotel employee, hotel manager, sued Joe Rioux for $4,000 for salary, loans, and the plaintiff acknowledged that he was also employed to observe the bootlegging business, receiving a percentage and sometimes buying it and selling it himself. E.T. Ryan was a partner in the business in order to receive the necessary license. The plaintiff and 3 other employees of the hotel were banned by the city from their employment there, but the plaintiff had managed to continue managing it from another location in the city. He admitted that Ryu had asked him in 1929 to advertise in the newspaper that Ryu was no longer interested in the hotel and that the hotel's name is now the Seymour Hotel. So, it stayed the Seymour Hotel, as far as we know, until it was bought by a man by the name of Shea, F.L. Shea, who bought it in 32 and owned it till 34, and it was called the King's Hotel. So we have the Saskatchewan Hotel, the Seymour Hotel, the King's Hotel. Shea, by the way, died in 1942, but in 1936, King, A.H. King, was proprietor of what was now called the Broadway Hotel. Okay, and King was the proprietor there until 1961. In 1959, King celebrated 23 years as the owner. The hotel is said to have 70 rooms, so obviously they expanded from that one. King came to Prince Albert from Tisdale. He passed away September 3rd, 1968, and had owned the hotel from 36 to 61. And King sold to a man by the name of James Bazian, who was the proprietor until 1974. Bazian sold to Denis Charbonneau and Leo Fontaine, who renamed it the Broadway Motor Inn. They in turn sold it to Joanne McCammon and Darlene Chase in 1976. I suspect some of you might know that name, Joanne McCammon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she managed the McDonald's when they first came to PA. In 1979, they owned it as Muck Case Enterprises and were listed as the owners in 1980. In 1981, the hotel was managed by Lawrence Gale, and he continued to manage it until 1991. Broadway later became known as Susie Q's around about 2000 until it was demolished. The space became a parking lot behind the Venice House and just west of the fire hall. Okay, so I think we might have another picture of the Broadway.
Nice.
Yes, we have.
Oh, yeah, there. That's good.
Okay, let's move to the next picture. And there,
Oh, there's
Susie Q's.
Yeah.
and it's there then
Oops,
called
sorry.
Susie Q's. That's okay. It's then called Susie Q's in that picture there.
And now it's the parking lot.
Yeah.
Now it's a parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact,
So-
that's where I always park when you go to Venice House. is in that.
Yeah, we parked there the other day, actually. Avenue Hotel. Well, December 21st, 1907, the hotel had a very auspicious opening. They didn't call it commodious, though. On Tuesday,
Boo!
the 17th of December. The bar room is the finest in the land and a twin of the King Edward Hotel bar. Now, we're presuming the King Edward Hotel in Toronto, but there may have been one in Leask called the King Edward. And in 1908, the Avenue Hotel Company had a proprietor by the name of George Dangerfield. Funny how these names keep circulating, kind of like coaches in the SJHL or the WHL, even the NHL. 1909, the proprietor was a man by the name of Michael C. Tynan, and that was spelled Tynen. He had a son who was a Northwest Mounted Police officer whose name was spelled T-Y-N-A-N. And then we can't track him, unfortunately. But Prince Albert Times, Hudson Bay Special, in 1910, the ad said that Tynan was the proprietor, steam heat, electric light, electric call bells, I need one of them, baths, and everything for the convenience of the traveler, noted for its excellent table, and of course, finest brands of wine, liquors, and cigars. Okay, now, you may notice Starland Theatre is part of that picture. On the very left side of it was where the Starland Theatre was. And above the Starland Theatre, those two floors above it, was the Starland Hotel. And it was advertised as European plan. And I have to admit, I had to check and see what the European plan was. And the European plan is basically what we expect of a hotel. You book in, you get your room, you pay for your room. You don't get any meals. I thought all hotels were like that, but before bed and breakfast and so on. Anyhow, it was the proprietor of the Starland Hotel was a man by the name of J.H. Van Koolbergen. And the Starland Hotel became the St. Regis Hotel. And the proprietor of that was J.H. Reed in 1913. Tynan then became the proprietor of the St. Regis in 1914. And in 1916, or later in 1914 till 1916, the St. Regis was owned by John Hosmer Fyan and Barock G. Clay. July 22nd, 1916, the St. Regis Bar reopens. A new refreshment establishment was opened today in the old St. Regis Hotel. The bar of the institution has been renovated and fixed up in a first-class manner, and the proprietors propose to serve all the drinks that the law will allow: ice cream, light lunches, and general refreshments. The St. Regis has been closed for over a year, and opening up now will be one of the most up-to-date establishments of its kind in Western Canada. So, but by 1919 it had disappeared. And in 1919 until 1941, the proprietors of the Avenue Hotel were Dr. Edward R. Tripp. It's spelled Trippa, but they always say Tripp, apparently. And C.P. Tripp, his wife, were the proprietors. March 1st of that year, 1916, the hotel was purchased by the Tripps and a man by the name of Clare. It will be operated by a company of which they are principals. The price was not made public. Owners were the Great West Life Assurance Company of Winnipeg. It was secured under foreclosure and taken from M.C. Tynan. Dr. and Mrs. Tripp are in charge of the Avenue. Ben Wellwood has possession of the Empress, and that's important. The hotel situation agitated over recent moves, read the headline in the Daily Herald. After Tripp and Clare purchased the Avenue. E.R. Tripp, proprietor of the Avenue Hotel, has rented the St. Regis Hotel. Owing to the increased patronage of the Avenue, the upper portion of the hotel will be used as an annex to the Avenue Hotel. Dr. Tripp has a number of propositions in hand for the rental of the lowest part of the St. Regis. And I'm just going to tell you, hang on to that thought about how the hotel situation became agitated after the Tripps and Clare bought the Avenue. Dr. Tripp states that there's a marked increase in the number of transients in the city, a certain indication of profitable business and prosperity. Don't know if our hotel keepers would say the same thing today. 1932, Schnee and Tadman, Fred Schnee and Ben Tadman, moved off River Street into a street-level frontage of the former St. Regis. And they stayed there until 1957, when Tadman's, Shea had moved out, Tadman's relocated to 1320 Central Avenue, which is currently the location of As Good As New. The Avenue Hotel eventually absorbed the Starland building, which housed the Starland Theatre and Schnee and Tadman. In 1945, Ian C. McLaren was the manager, remained the manager until 1950. August 1950, renovations planned following the transfer, including extending the hotel along the front to the sidewalk, the dining room to be moved to the southeast section, and the lobby to the front section, now occupied by the barber shop. The beer parlor to be located in the present hotel lobby. Hotel recently purchased by W.J. Rosenbaum and Harry Binsky, and they bought it from Widowfield Agencies. Rosenbaum is the former operator of a hotel in Port Alberti, and of course Harry Binsky owned and operated Binsky's department store, which was on the corner of 9th and Central, where the Salvation Army now has their location. And the hotel was renovated again in 1966, and the front renovated circa 1980 when Howard Schenk became the manager. He lasted until 83 or 84 when Alex Musician took over as manager. He stayed until 1979, 1980 when he moved to the management of the Lincoln Hotel. In 1998, the ownership group was the Avenue Hotel PA Limited, and Ernest Juby was the last manager. The Avenue Hotel, of course, was demolished in 2003 to facilitate the construction of the Forestry Center. The center became what is now the Prince Albert campus of the University of Saskatchewan. Now, back in those days, it was a fairly decent hotel. And John Diefenbaker, when he married Edna, John and Edna came back from their honeymoon and stayed in that hotel until their house at 20th Street West was completed. Let's look at another picture there, Connie, please. Okay, two popular hotels, St. Regis and the Avenue. And another one. And there's a really nice shot of the St. Regis and the Avenue, when it looked like a pleasant enough place to stay with the balconies on it and so on. And there it is, after the architect, Frank Moore, decided to redo the front of the building in 1980. Okay. So, the next one is the Windsor Hotel. Probably none of you will remember the Windsor Hotel. The Windsor Hotel stood on River Street at 2nd Avenue, overlooking the river. It was built by Barrett L. Clemens in 1904. He partnered with Andrew Westwood, again a name we'd already heard with respect to the Queen's Hotel. Barrett Clemens was the proprietor from 1908 and 1909. In 1913, the proprietors were the Marion brothers. In 1905, fire wiped out Kidd's roller mill. Fire engines did not begin throwing water until the fire was put out by a bucket brigade and pumps of the Windsor Hotel. And Kidd's roller mill was basically 11th Street at 2nd Avenue West. On August 24th, 1905, the hotel was in possession of a handsome new bus. Of course, bring travelers from the train station. And in November 1905, the management fitted up comfortable rooms and well-equipped sample rooms in the building adjoining the hotel property. 9 complete bedrooms fitted upstairs, which will be used by permanent male boarders. A new addition of 40 rooms and installation of 2 billiard tables in the big room currently used as a sample room at the head of stairs was being contemplated in May of 1906. And in May of 1906, Westwood and Clemens bought a new team for $700 for the Prince Albert Lumber Company to haul the Windsor Hotel bus. And they added an addition in July 1906, valued at $3,000. And an interesting thing here, I don't know if we have any former letter carriers in the hall, but on November 8th, 1906, 238 letters were posted on Monday morning, letters written by guests on Sunday. So the Windsor must have been fairly full for there to be 238 letters written that day. 1910 ad, Gateway City's leading hostelry, E.L. Clemens, proprietor, a special for commercial trade, first-class sample rooms, comfortable bedrooms, parlors, thoroughly modern, charmingly situated on the bank of beautiful Saskatchewan River. Don't think they sold fine wines. I don't know. Anyway, based on evidence in a lawsuit filed by Mrs. M.Z. Morin, the hotel was owned before July 27, 1912 by O.C. Milham. It was sold to the Windsor Hotel Company Limited for $120,000. B.L. Clemens held mortgages on land and chattels amounting to $74,000. And Mrs. Morin claimed to have purchased the furnishings and furniture for the hotel between May and October from her own and her children's money. The children were J.A. Marion, J.E. Marion, and M.B. Marion. She won, by the way. She didn't get as much money as she wanted, but she did win. In October 1914, Clemens took possession of the hotel for outstanding debt, principal and interest. Clemens claimed that at the time over $12,000 was owed with no payment having been received since November 1913. Clemens sold the hotel from October 1914. He ran the hotel from October 1914 until he sold it to his wife in July 1915 for $30,000. Unfortunately, the Windsor Hotel was destroyed by fire in January of 1916, and it was never rebuilt. The Lincoln Hotel. So that's after they added the addition to the Windsor Hotel. Okay, now this picture, Ken actually very kindly managed to pick it out of what we had in a larger picture. But this building is the Saskatchewan Hotel, and this building here is the Lincoln Hotel. And if any of you remember the Lincoln Hotel, you'll notice it's very short, because they added an extension to it at one point. Welcome, Ken. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Okay, originally the Lincoln Hotel was built as a commercial or a business block in 1910. And it was owned by Charles O'Connor and W. Blaine Goodfellow. It was purchased from them and run as Tuxedo Hotel by Max Smith, who lived in the hotel, a man by the name of Strawn, who lived in Saskatoon, and a man by the name of Backhand in 1913. And then in 1914, M.J. Dunn ran it as the Tourist Hotel. It became the new Windsor Hotel later on, when it was run by John Leonard. The Tourist Hotel from 14 to 16. Then the owners were the Marion family. March 28, 17, Fred Marion came home to visit with relatives. He'd been overseas fighting for Canada and the Allies before proceeding to Vancouver, where he will take up a position with Canada Customs. 1917, the hotel remained open and was listed under the At the Hotels column in the Prince Albert Daily Herald. Lovely column that they had on a weekly basis, where they would list who were guests at the hotel. And you could tell which hotels were doing well and which weren't doing well. I don't know whether privacy would allow that today, but I hope it. Anyways, the hotel was opened in May of 1917. On July 7th of 1917, Mrs. Marion closed the New Windsor Hotel and left for Douglas, BC, where she will reside with her son Fred, who is a customs collector at that port. Further, 10 days later, on July 17th, an announcement of the marriage on July 6th of J.G. Leonard to Isabella Marion. They will reside at the New Windsor Hotel, which they intend to open to the public. So it was closed basically from July 7th until July 17th, when the hotel was listed in the hotel's column. So for 10 days it was closed, and then it was open again. There was a restaurant open in the hotel for the convenience of travelers passing through the city, and it will prove to be convenient as it will enable travelers who have only a few minutes' time in the city to have a light lunch before continuing their journey. The restaurant itself is spotlessly clean, and although small, is very well laid out, with tables placed beside the windows and a lunch counter on the other side for rush orders. 1926, the New Windsor Hotel was owned and operated by Gus Langus. And on June 6th of 1926, he was in court. We don't know what for, but he was in court. 2122, DJ McMahon was the proprietor. It was closed in 1923. 1925, A.D. Carrentus was the manager. April of 1925, Kelly Williams, formerly of the Merchants Hotel, has now taken over management of the New Windsor Hotel. The interior of the hotel is to undergo thorough renovation. Then in 27, John Bugazed and Gus Langus were the proprietors, and they held that proprietorship till 1943, at which time it was owned by Ralph Naish. And he was there till 1966. 67, John Semchuk is the manager. In 68, Semchuk and Morley Mishkin were managers. 72, Jack Allen took over with a transient staff to 78. 79, 80, Alex Mushishin, who had been at the Avenue Hotel, took over as the manager. The Diefenbaker committee rooms from 1953 to 1968 were in the basement of the Lincoln Hotel. And Ralph Naish was a very good friend of John Diefenbaker's. Okay, the next picture, Connie, I think that'll show you, you can see the extension onto the hotel, just the second door down on the 15th Street side. And there's stories that could be told about that hotel that are better not told. Okay, the Empress Hotel. The excavation in 1910 for a 4-story hotel to cost $125,000. Unfortunately, as you can tell, it never did get that 4th story. A man by the name of Wellwood, his widow, wrote about his arrival in Prince Albert in 1907. As hotel accommodation at that time was inadequate to meet the needs of a growing city, he formed a joint stock company and built the Empress Hotel. That appeared in an Edmonton newspaper in January of 1965. E.R. Trippa was the original manager of the Empress Hotel and owner. He took ownership in August 1913. The managing director was a man by the name of George Dempster, and the secretary, George Dempster was the secretary, and George Brock became the cashier in 1914. The Empress was in receivership after the Trips and Clare purchased the Avenue Hotel. Remember I told you there was turmoil after they purchased the Avenue Hotel. The Empress went into receivership. Empress Hotel Company members in dispute and receivership was seen as the only solution. Frank Kisby ran a public auction for the sum of $5,000 to the Canada Territories Corporation, who sold it. A company, Canada Territories Corporation Limited, was a company which had an interest in the hotel. The sale does not in any way affect the operation of the hotel, which continues under the management of Jay Callahan, who reports the business is exceedingly satisfactory. In fact, there were 37 guests registered at the hotel at the time of the sale in November 1915. An ad in the Daily Herald in November 1916, the furnishings of the Empress Hotel are still there, and the hotel will be operated as heretofore by Jim Callahan, manager. July 18th, 1917, Frank Kisby has an ad regarding preliminary notice of auction sale of hotel furnishings, including oak chairs, cutlery, steam hot plate, dishes, general kitchenware, deer heads, tables, and numerous other items. So again, you can see as the economy of Prince Albert goes up, there's great interest in building and buying new hotels. As the economy starts to tail off, you get fires, you get auction sales, you get mortgage foreclosures, and so on. So from 1919 to 1941, Barrett Clemens was the proprietor of the Empress Hotel. And George Brock, formerly manager of the hotel, returned to Prince Albert after war service on April 11th, 1919. And I remember Bob Whalen. I don't know how many of you might remember Walter Whalen. It was called Mr. Red Cross. Bob Whalen was his son, lived in Ottawa, and he told me about in the 1930s when they lived in an apartment block on River Street West, walking past the Empress Hotel and hearing the sounds of the boxing club, which was located in the basement of the Empress Hotel. In 1946, the Mackay brothers were the new owners of the Empress, having bought it from B.L. Clemens, who had owned it for 28 years, since February 1st, 1918. Possession date for the Mackay brothers was March 1st. And William Mackay Jr. managed the Empress. Clemens came to Prince Albert in 1902 to look around, bought the Empress in 1918 as a mortgage repossession, owned and operated the Windsor and later the Empress before selling it in the late 40s. He resided in the city after retirement and died in 1960. So in 1946, the hotel was owned by Mackay Hotel Company Limited. The Hendersons listed the manager as G.W. Henderson in 1947 and 1949, and ownership is Mackay Hotel Company Limited. In 1950, the hotel was managed by O. Demers, and on November 19th, 1952, more than 100 persons of various political persuasions met in the hotel to launch the formation of the Diefenbaker clubs throughout the riding. In 1964, December, Wes Walker purchased the hotel from Parkland Hotel Limited for more than $200,000. At that time, the hotel was being managed by Hector Demers. And became then the Astro Hotel. And I remember attending a banquet at the Astro Hotel when Johnny Bauer, goaltender for the Maple Leafs, when they last won the Stanley Cup, a few years back, when Johnny Bauer was the guest speaker at the hotel. I think that must have been in 1959 because the building was, I'm sorry, 1966, because the building burnt down January 21st, 1967, and became the site of the A&W. Wes Walker negotiated a deal with Neil Bartlett for the A&W, and Wes Walker used to say that he could now lie on the beach in Texas and earn more money in a day than he used to earn in a month when he was busily managing that hotel. So, and I believe him. The A&W at that time was extremely popular, and turned over a great number of dollars each day. And that fire was a cold, cold day, wasn't it, Ken?
Yes, it was. I can remember the fire very well. And we, it seems like half the population of Prince Albert came down to watch the fire. And
Sounds like a
massacre
fire
in the
in the
National
B&W.
Hotel. And he needed more money that day than probably made in a year. But his was the only beer parlor open. That was one of the customers. It was standing room only in the National Hotel all day long. Oh, I remember that.
I was going to talk about how the Salvation Army, you know, because it was so cold, the Salvation Army had their facility right on First Avenue, almost across the street.
Oh, yeah.
They would make hot coffee and sandwiches and take them out to the firefighters and the police officers. While all these other individuals who were sightseers had to go and warm up in the National Hotel bar. Okay, any more pictures of the National? There's the Astro. Okay. And now we're going to move to the Merchants Hotel. Building operations in 1910 included Mr. Foley's Brick Hotel on First Avenue East. T.J. Foley managed the hotel until his death in 1920. His widow Catherine inherited the hotel, and their son Earl managed it. Catherine would not sell or give the hotel to her son. She retired in 1942-43, but beginning in 1938, the hotel was being managed by EAI. I think that's wonderful to have an I being the manager of your hotel, keeping a close eye on everything going on there. From 1945 to 1953, the hotel was owned and operated by J.P. Lear. It was managed from 54 to 60 by N.R. Jarvis, and from 61 to 63 by Ralph Neese. H. Ron Carter managed it from 64 until 1986, and it became a Sheraton Hotel in 68, and that designation lasted until 1983-84. The last manager of whom I'm aware was Harold Corbett, who managed the hotel from 1987 until the early 2000s. And around 2010, the Marlborough Hotel became a Quality Inn, and it is currently a travel lodge. These are some of the stories of Prince Albert's historic hotels, but not all the stories have been told. We are still searching for information, and that's the Merchants Hotel. And we've got a couple more pictures there, I think, of the demolition and the addition of the Merchants and the addition of the Marlborough Tower. And that's when they were putting in the swimming pool and sauna. Okay, so here's one of the stories that we're still, you can go ahead, we're still seeking information on. The Klondike Hotel. We have been unable to locate where this hotel stood. And we don't know the dates of its operation. We've got a rough idea of the dates of operation. It is possible that it was located on River Street and in 1897. The Prince Albert Board of Trade attempted to cash in on the gold rush to the Yukon, suggesting that it should be the starting point for people heading north to search for gold. They actually put together a booklet on how to get to the Klondike, the safest, best, and cheapest route to Yukon gold fields. It's via the Regina, Prince Albert, Green Lake, and Fort McMurray water route. It never became a popular route, and little wealth came the way of Prince Albert merchants, as most of the prospectors had already bought their supplies before arriving in the town. This hotel, it looks like it's the Marquis Hotel, although listed in the Hendersons as the Margie's Hotel. It was designed but never built. The Marquis had a registered office in the Mitchell Block at 1104 Central Avenue. Ryan, we talked about the Mitchell Block before. In 1914. The registered owners were A.J. Manville and Charles O'Connor.
Charles O'Connor owned a lot of hotels.
He was involved in a lot of
Yeah.
hotels, you bet, yeah. The man had money, and of course the Manvilles had their chunk of cash as well. So, and then there's P.J. Flanagan. We don't have a slide for that.
Okay.
P.J. Flanagan, I became interested in the history of P.J. Flanagan, who lived in Prince Albert in the 1890s into the early 1900s. Primarily, I'm interested because of the history of the Senator Hotel in Saskatoon, which opened as the Flanagan Hotel. P.J. Flanagan was listed as a hotelier in the directories of the 1890s and subsequent years. I spoke with Jeff O'Brien, the Saskatoon City archivist, who provided information on the Flanagan who opened the Flanagan Hotel. And he was a James Flanagan, and he'd moved to Saskatoon from Oak Lake. So James Flanagan, I don't know if he's related to P.J. Flanagan or not, but obviously it wasn't the same man. We do know P.J. Flanagan, although listed as an hotelier in Prince Albert, also owned a ranch which he sold by auction. In 1906, he moved to Tisdale to run the hotel, which he had had built there. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Melfort, where he and his partner had bought the Melfort Hotel. Yet by 1909, he was back in Prince Albert working at the Queen's Hotel as a clerk. He was fined, and we know that because he was fined $5 for selling liquor on the Sabbath to an employee of the Avenue Hotel who had been pressed into service by the chief of police to try to get something on the owners of the Queen's Hotel and the Prince Albert Hotel. George Russell biography. George Russell, you may be familiar with the name. Between George and his brother, they were responsible for Burns Meats coming and Burns Stockyards coming to Prince Albert. In his biography, he mentioned that in 1906 he had bought an hotel on the east side of Central, near the river. He bought it from an American named Brooks. I've been unable to locate any such land transaction in 1906 or any such hotel. The nearest thing I found to it was a rooming house on the west side of Central Avenue run by a Mrs. Brooks. So, I don't know how old George was when he wrote that little biography. He may have been an age, he may have been suffering from memory loss or something, I don't know. But anyway, there are lots of stories about the historic Prince Albert hotels, and I'm glad to have been able to share some of them with you today. Those of you who are thinking I might have talked about the Flamingo Hotel or the Southsider Motel, they're way too recent for me to consider to be a historic hotel. If you have any questions or you have any...
Oscar Black used to cut hair in the avenue.
Pardon me?
Oscar Black was a barber that used to cut hair in that avenue.
Right, yeah, yeah.